Although Law & Order, SVU is going strong a quarter-century after its premiere episode, several harsh realities about Season 1 become apparent on rewatch. Law & Order, SVU is considered one of the best Law & Order series because of its commitment to supporting and empowering survivors. From its first episode, it made it clear that this series was about giving a voice to victims of heinous crimes that are not often talked about, and the show is often groundbreaking in how seriously it takes sexual assault and similar crimes. That said, this long-running procedural has changed over the years in many ways. Benson's Law & Order, SVU Season 2016 features almost all new faces, and Mariska Hargitay is now the only cast member left who has been with the series since its premiere episode, as Ice-T joined at the beginning of Season 2 and everyone else is relatively new. Thus, it is unsurprising that Law & Order, SVU was very different during its first season than it is today, and many of the changes are for the better. Law & Order, SVU Season 1 was far less respectful toward gender non-conforming people. SVU often used derogatory terms for men who wore women's clothes. Benson and Stabler check out a dead body in Law & Order SVU. Although recent episodes of Law & Order, SVU have explored transgender issues in a respectful manner, this was not always the case. Law & Order, SVU Season 1 sometimes contains language that would be condemned as offensive today when dealing with victims, witnesses, or suspects who are crossdressers or transgender. This is established early on with Munch's, Richard Belzer, reaction to discovering a male murder victim who might have been raped and had women's underwear stuffed in his mouth, which included questioning the man's identity using a slur. The type of language used, along with awkwardness on the part of the cops in cases involving gay men, was common in 1999 when Law & Order, SVU began. The procedural's intention was likely to depict the cops as realistically as possible while attempting to support sexual assault survivors. Unfortunately, the ethos of the time didn't allow for that mission to treat LGBTQ+ survivors, especially those under the transgender umbrella, as equal to the cisgender women who made up the bulk of the survivor population in these early episodes. Stabler often went way too far to continue working for SVU. Stabler letting his anger get the better of him was par for the course. Law & Order SVU Stabler getting rough with a suspect. Law & Order, SVU's Elliot Stabler, Christopher Maloney, was always hot-tempered and often acted impulsively, which are traits that have not completely disappeared 25 years later. However, in Season 1, he often crosses the line with witnesses and suspects. He often stands too close to suspects, and his physical intimidation sometimes crosses over into actual violence, making it likely that confessions and other evidence would be thrown out if it were today because of the appearance of coercion. Sadly, this type of misbehavior on the part of law enforcement was more acceptable on television in 1999, and Stabler is not the only character who would have to be toned down if the first season were rewritten. Stabler's behavior is a little much even for his superiors, and he is sometimes reprimanded for it, but he doesn't face real consequences until the Season 1 finale. Ironically, he gets in trouble for admitting he had secret fantasies of killing pedophiles rather than for anything he actually does when interacting with suspects. Benson often violated boundaries and she was justified by her intentions. Some of the ways Benson tried to help were inappropriate. Benson struggles with boundaries in Season 1, a recurring problem throughout the series but which was particularly pronounced in the early episodes. In the series premiere, she has to learn Captain Cragen's lesson that we don't pick the victim. During that storyline, Benson engages in inappropriate behavior such as alienating a widow by informing her that her husband was a rapist and that she'd better start talking about what she knows and questioning a suspect on her own while Stabler is busy. This behavior continues in later seasons, such as in Season 2, which includes Benson being hit by a restraining order when she gets overly involved in helping a young girl who is claiming to be abused by her parents. This trend has also made somewhat of a comeback, considering Benson's obsession with the Flynn family in Season 25. However, it is particularly pronounced in Season 1, when Benson's overstepping of boundaries was often attributed to her being new to the Special Victims Unit. Law & Order, SVU Season 1 had far less diversity of victims. Most victims in early SVU were white cisgender women. Law & Order SVU, a victim lying next to a crosswalk with blood on her head. Law & Order, SVU has offered more diverse stories in recent years, with victims of various genders, races, and sexual orientations. However, Law & Order, SVU Season 1 mostly deals with white cisgender women who have been assaulted by men. This was an issue that would take many years to fix and which reflected the lack of diverse representation on television in the early 2000s. That said, there was some effort at diverse representation even during this initial season. One episode features a victim who might have been a crossdresser and another features a gay man. There is also an episode near the end of the season revolving around a man who had once been a victim and who was now abusing young boys himself. However, these episodes were in the minority and relied to some degree on stereotypes, diluting their power.